1934 Austin 10 hot rod. Oh yeah, I could daily drive this. Hi, I'm George and I have a car addiction. Obviously, what was I thinking? This is how a guy ends up with a whole fleet of cars and not one of them usable. I convinced myself that this would be a viable daily driver, and I would have bought it had it not been sold by the time I got to see it. And I did go and see it. You will see it later on. It's a cool thing. I have been diligently squirreling away any little scraps and scrapes I can, putting together a wedge to try and get myself a car, and it will be a really smelly old wreck. It will be something that can be a viable rolling resto, just to get me round, get me to interviews, get me in and out to the unit to work on the cars. The Jag was supposed to be that car, but with the transport costs coming across Europe, I guess that car would cost me £3 grand easily to buy and bring back here, and that's just not in the budget. So I'm looking for something. It should probably be a Range Rover, so then I can break it later on for parts, but I've tried that before and ended up with cars that I've fallen in love with and not been able to force myself to move on. So I'm thinking about an old Merc, something bomb-proof, that's comfy and practical, and that's kind of where my head's at. But mentioning Land Rovers, it is time to look at the Vogue, so let's do that. This is the final strip down phase for the Vogue. We're going for the tail end, the rear cross member, and the first thing that has to come off is the tailgate. Two of these bolts were totally threaded, so I don't know if that was from the factory. I presume this has been off before. The next thing to come off was the check straps. That was just circlips here, and they go back on for safekeeping, you might notice. So with the tailgate off, the hinges are exposed. These are sprung hinges, unlike the early cars, and the pins that hold them are splined at one end. Now I started hammering on these and I realized they're not coming out, so I just cut the hinges off because the hinges are just welded onto the rear cross member and it's going anyway. I tried to make this piece of soundproofing come out like a caterpillar. It just looks like it's trying to hump the floor though. We'll see it again. Oh, Mr. Underlay. So this floor has been gotten at before. There's plenty of rust around the edges of it, holes, and there's patches, and I think these are bonded in. So you see here the rear cross member is completely rotten, and I started trying to release it off these outer sections, what are called goalposts colloquially with Land Rover people. The goalpost is the section that runs up and around the whole tailgate. So there's these interesting little curved sections right in the corners, and I didn't want to release those off the goalpost, so what I've done is I've tried to release them off the cross member so they stay with the car. The middle section here, this lip, all of this lip here holds on the weather seal, and I'm leaving the middle section on the rear cross member. I'll take it off once it's off the car. So you see here, I've started to release these off. I've managed to get some daylight showing through. I had to just cut a few little wells that were put on. And all the way across this cross member is completely rotten where it meets the rear of the boot floor. It's just a total shit show. Totally rotten. And you can see here, this cross member carries the two rear body mounts. Of course the rust is worse directly over them. And they've been patched here, I think. So over to the near side and started to release those sections too. Now the exhaust was in the way on this, so I had to move that up and down and start playing around with it to get in, to get access. Next thing I did was release the two body mounts. And I don't know how they did this because it was the same on the other body mounts when I was doing the sills. You can't get the bolt out. The bolt doesn't fit out, you know, it fouls on the body. I left them just loose and I went to tackle the rear floor. And you see as I go across here, I'm dabbing some metal cutting grease onto each spot weld just before I drill it, just to keep the drill bit in good nick. If you've got a sharp drill bit, it's not difficult to keep it that way if you don't use too much pressure. You let the drill bit do the work and keep it lubricated, I found. I had to drill through a weld on both sides. That wasn't too much of a hassle. I used a very big drill bit. And the bottom section here of this goalpost is rotten. So I'll either replace this or cut it out and just weld up around what's left. I found that this car I was using the cold chisel all the time. It's just such a good thing. Sometimes it'll cut through spot welds, and all of the time it will cut through the remains of a spot weld if you've drilled out most of it but just missed a tiny bit. So with all of this released, I thought if I give it a couple of judicious whacks with a lump hammer, maybe it'll just pop out. Well, no such luck. And ended up doing a little bit of damage to this lip. It did move somewhat, but it's very hard to tell when you're hitting something like this. Just a little bit of a running repair here. That never happened. You can see here just the amount, just the detritus that's coming out of this. I mean, the thing is completely rotten. So this is the end, and you know, I was hitting it and watching the gap here, and it did open up slightly, you can see down inside here, but it really wasn't moving too much. I started testing up on the top of it to see if somehow there were spot welds up here. I don't know how they would get them in here. I don't think it was built up in layers at this particular section. So a couple of whacks and you see it is moving. I think it's just the friction of the body sitting on this that's holding it in. But the problem is I don't have a jack here that's tall enough to do anything meaningful in terms of lifting the body. So I decided if I get all of the rubber mounts out, it might give it the room it needs just to sit down a bit, and I'll be able to manipulate it out of the car. But of course I hit this problem again with the bolt not being able to clear. So I tried to use the center punch, this is the new one I found in the Esprit, to vault the steel directly over the bolt so that it would come out, but that wasn't working. So out came the angle grinder, and when I had a few cuts made, then I was able to hammer this up slightly. And still, it wasn't so easy to come out, but it was coming out by hook or by crook. And in the end, I drifted it out with the center punch from underneath, at the risk of ruining the threads, but I'm pretty sure I got away with it. Was that as good for you as it was for me? So I had to admit defeat on the rear cross member. This was 2 days work, by the way, 2 full days. Lesson learned in the past, I'm very cautious about this kind of thing. I did, for a minute, entertain the idea of trying to lift this body with a stupid concoction of pieces of wood. And then I left it because I do have a jack that will do this, and I think you're really going to like it. I just don't have it available right now. Next time I will show you that thing, and I will show you why I've kept it handy always, as long as I've had Land Rovers. So I went and attacked the rear floor, which I wasn't looking forward to. It was going to be a pretty boring thing, drilling out a lot of spot welds. So I devised a new way, and I went at it with the angle grinder because I'm not going to save this panel. It's so much faster, and the way I was doing it was just, you'll see here, rocking the angle grinder from the very beginning, keep an even pressure and just rock it side to side. Almost don't put any pressure on it at all actually, just let the weight of the angle grinder do the work and just keep it moving from side to side so that you get the whole spot weld. And this is exponentially faster than doing it with a drill bit. So I got 3/4 of the way around, and then I realized I was running out of time, and I found 3 cross sections of spot welds on the boot floor that just aren't on the early cars, so I wasn't expecting them at all. So the next time when I go back, I'll just zip all those out. I'll have the jack with me to get the body of the car lifted and hopefully get that cross member out, and then we can start the final rebuild phase. You know, I was having really good days with the Vogue, and this is the first day I've had in as long as I can remember that things didn't quite go the way I wanted them to go. And that's okay. Defeat is a life lesson best served up in a cold unit. You can't win them all. I will have my day with the Vogue. Next time we'll get through this thing, we'll get this bloody rear cross member out. I'm back on the trail of a new rear boot floor for this thing. If you have any leads, get in touch. I didn't get a chance to chase up the last leads, but I will. I'm back on that. So hopefully I get something in good time. Now, guess what this is? Episode 1, the history of the Esprit. It has finally landed. I am so excited. There are really cool things happening here. I'm not going to say much more about it other than to say that it was difficult. Very difficult, not nearly as easy as I led you to believe or as I was led to believe, so there you go. Anyway, it is time for the Esprit, and here's how things went in the last couple of weeks. We're going for the tanks this time. Now, I never mentioned this manual that I have is actually for Series 1, so there's some slight differences in the fueling system. Don't ask me what they are, I just see different things in this diagram than what's on the car. What I'm going to do is use my phone like an endoscope. This is a view down the side of the fuel tank on the offside of the car. So this is the outboard side of the offside fuel tank. Get your head around that. Okay, new tools. There's a screwdriver. But I'm looking here for where the tanks are anchored. So nothing on the outboard side of the tank. And what about the inboard side? Yes, okay, there's an anchor on the inboard side towards the bulkhead between the engine bay and the passenger compartment, going rearward now, and I don't see anything else. That's just a rubber grommet or something there. I can't tell if there's something there or not, I don't think so. So, from outside the car and underneath the sill, we go through an access hole, and there is the outlet for the fuel on a banjo with a bolt. This hole we're looking through. Now, if we stop here, that rubber grommet there should be one filling this hole we're going through, and these two cables are the handbrake coming from the passenger compartment. If we stop again, we see that there's definitely a leak in this tank. It's weeping. And this is the bolt we just have to release. The foam here is to stop drumming, and I think there should be some on the top of the tank too, but that was obviously gone. But we know that there's a shelf missing up there as well. So, find the right size socket and we'll get this bolt out on the banjo. But first, I'm going to go for the fuel inlet from the filler. So off with the Jubilee clip, and I had to come round, get the cap off. The caps are held in with these little chains, and often they're missing. Gladly they're on this car. So off with that, and it wasn't too difficult to get the filler out. But I did have to release this vent. Now this is a vent that carries air across the rear screen to help it demist. So out that came, out the fuel filler came. Now look at this. Here's that ear that takes air from the outside of the car, cool air, to the inlet manifold. Look at the length of it. Because of the fuel filler, it had to double back rearward in the car and then come forward. And there is so much excess material here. And remember, this is steel braided. This is steel banded. So it's heavy. It's quite heavy for what it is. So have a look at how much extra material there is here. By necessity, of course. It stretches all the way over. The inlet could actually be on the opposite side of the car and this could still feed it. If I just put part of the airbox back in roughly where it would be, you'll see how much excess material there is here. So we're going to make some modifications now. Because I've got so much extra and I wasn't able to free this off the ear, I'm just cutting it off. But right up against where the ear finishes. This is exciting stuff because this is modification time, and proper modifications, you know, for the betterment of the car and the weight saving. We just get in here with a snips to cut the steel banding. So out comes the ear, just about, only just fits. Now, if we look at it, it's a cool thing, but if I can make another one of these that lets the air flow directly through, so the air comes into the ear and at this point flows straight into the inlet, that would be very cool. It would also save weight, and I dare say it would get cooler air on a longer run when that hose would probably have just heated up. So here's that banjo bolt, I think it was a 19mm, but I'm sure it's an imperial size, but that's what I used. And out it came. And this tank, as it happens, was totally dry. I thought there was fuel in here. Gladly no. With all that done, it's just the anchor bolts. So there's that one that's on the inboard side, out it came, and the tank was free. If there was another bolt supposed to be in this tank, it wasn't in it. They're known to be a very snug fit. But I always find with this kind of thing, you know, your mind wants you to go straight to brute force and just pull and yank something like this out. But I always find that just gently teasing something like this will get it out much easier. So out that came. Here's the well that it was sitting in. There's actually a lot of dead space here. If the tank was a more bespoke shape, the fuel could be made sit lower. So here's all the treasure, grommets, and now some of these washers and stuff fell when I was releasing other things above. You can see here the hole we looked up through earlier on. I think I'll make up a little tool roll for the car when I'm done, and you know, this screwdriver's got to be included. This is a rivet, one of many, that holds on the sill. You have to take the tanks out to get the sills off the car. And I found glass, and it's clear. So now I know that the interior bulkhead glass was definitely broken at some point. I spent ages trying to figure out what the hell was inside this tank, and it really took me about 5 minutes to cop on. This is just the float from the sender unit. I felt like a dumbass. So here's all the treasure from the offside. Lots of little washers and grommets and little bits and pieces, and this screwdriver, which must have been like new when it was lost, because the bit that was protected by the handle is perfect. Onto the near side. We know exactly what we're doing here, so this will not take long at all. Off with these finishing bits, the door seal and the trim, and then we go for the rivets all the way down and along. The ear comes out. The quarter glass comes out along with its seal, the duct itself, and the capping rail. Inside the car, this lat of wood here is what's missing on the shelf on the other side. Out that came the seat belt, these shelves, that's what's missing, obviously. And this finishing panel that links the outer skin of the car with the inner. This is a metal panel, and like I said, on the other side this is getting modified, lightened and probably made more functional. The vent on this side, out it comes. The duct comes out and we go for the fuel filler. That bracket was not on the other side, so it's obviously a bracket that secures that end of the shelf that sits there. And now I'm good to get the tank out. And this is one of those cases where it took probably a day on the offside of the car because we were figuring things out, and it took substantially less time. I haven't checked the logs, but I'll bring you that again. Treasure on the near side too. Here's more rivets for the near side sill, and an errant bolt. I wonder what this is for, possibly for holding the tank in. And there's the tank out. These tanks look to be in good shape. The offside one is weeping, and they need to be taken apart to be cleaned up and probably coated on the inside. If I can afford to replace them with aluminium ones, I will. Here is the treasure from the near side. That's an original Jubilee clip for one of the breathers on the tank, and I have my very first half moon spanner, and guess what? It's a 1/2 inch. The gods were listening when I was laughing about my 1/2 inch spanner being broken. That is a win. So more glass, but there are two colors of glass here. Some is tinted green, which means it was the quarter light probably. Some is clear. So this is the general state of things after a day's work on a car. There is stuff everywhere, but I always try and clean up, tidy up, because it's more efficient. You get back into things quicker when you come for a day's work. So that's all the Esprit for this time. There is so little left to do. We will do the very last things. I will just be running checks on the body to see there's nothing fouling before we lift it off. Now the Valet Pro kit, I've been trying to send this to somebody who's just like me, getting stuck in. Just getting stuck in, doesn't matter what's happening, they're just trying to work on the car. This time I'm going to send it to a guy called Andrew Nicholson. Now Andy got in touch to tell me that he had polished his tools and taken a stock of them in preparation for working on his car. Dude, sounds like classic time wasting to me. Just get stuck in. I forgot Andy in the last 2 rounds of shout outs for my patrons. He just went under the radar. He didn't say a word. He's been a great sport and I feel really bad about it. Between that, his will to work on the car, and the car is rare. The car is a Mitsubishi Colt Galant GTO. I had to look that up. And as Wikipedia puts it, Mitsubishi didn't aggressively export this car outside of Japan. It was a really a kind of a JDM thing. There were a few sent to the UK and Ireland. This car is quite rare. Kind of a fastback baby muscle car look to it. 1975, by the way. So anyway, Andy, get stuck in, mate. The kit's on its way to you. Now, like I said, I went to see this hot rod. This thing really piqued my interest. I never kind of had a fancy for a hot rod before, but between the last episode, Mark Wellnitz's 29 Fate, and going to see this thing, I'd really like to kind of flex my creativity, put together a hot rod, something I could really just do whatever I liked on. So maybe that's something for down the road. But anyway, I went to see this thing, and it turns out the guy, whose name is Colm, is a VW fanatic and classic restorer. So here's what I found.
My name is Colm Redmond, a restorer of Volkswagens.
Don't let Colm's laid-back, easygoing demeanour fool you, for when Colm eats a banana, okay, Colm's not Banana Man, but what he obviously has a big appetite for is restoring Volkswagen buses, because he went from just a crappy old Beetle to 9, a fleet of 9 buses, restoring them one at a time as he went. I had to find out how.
I got my first Volkswagen in '99, living in San Francisco. Needed something to get around, it was cheap, so rebuilt it and went from there. No. Volkswagen's an easy engine to learn on, so it was a good starting point. It was fairly rough, yeah. I wasn't welding at the time, so there was a hole in the floor, I had to put a piece of timber into it. Ended up rebuilding the engine. That was easy enough. Yeah, it was rough enough. No, about 5 years later got my second Volkswagen, Beetle, 76 Beetle. Rebuilt that. Then I got a Variant, rebuilt that. Then a notchback, rebuilt that and swapped it for a Carmen Ghia. Swapped that for a bus. So that started the buses then. It was about 3 years. I bought it for personal use, yeah. Bought it for €250. It was in bits. It was a shell. No engine, no loom, no gearbox, no windows, nothing. So I spent the next year and a half rebuilding it and decided to start the business renting them then. We're busy all summer, so at the end of the summer we bought a second one. By the next summer we had 2 more, and then we just kept adding them every year. Yeah. April to the end of September.
So what were you doing the rest of the time?
Rebuilding them, fixing dents, rebuilding engines, just getting them ready for the next season. I didn't start restoring for other people until about a year ago. I'm just sick of the rentals. Sick of restoring vans and giving them to people that don't necessarily appreciate them and coming back and having to fix dents and scrapes and stuff. I wasn't in the beginning, but after 6 years, yeah, you get a bit annoyed. I picked that up. It was in a neighbour's shed, been sitting there for 30 years. I think he had started a restoration on it and never finished it. It sat in the corner here, I didn't know what to do with it for a couple of months, and then I decided to get an angle grinder out and cut 6 inches out of the roof. I think it looks a little bit better, but then I realised I have too many projects on, so decided to shift it on. Irish logbook, 1934. Not with the roof chopped, it was fairly easy, yeah, got a lot of calls. It took a bit of stretching, hammering to get it straight, but no, it was easy enough. I had to lengthen it a little bit, just above the windscreen, but apart from that, it all lined up very well. B-pillars lined up, so it was just a matter of stretching the front, and the doors possibly will need a little bit of stretching. An original Austin 10 engine, I think it's 1 litre, 1.1 litre, something like that. Yeah, picked up the pillar drill and the shot blaster, and there is a sheet metal roller over on the table over there I got from him as well. It's all stuff that he'd had in the shed for 30 years, 40 years. Wasn't using it anymore, so he's clearing it out. It works great, yeah. I think he had picked it up back in the early 80s, and it was old when he picked it up. I've no idea how old it is, but I started restoring that about 4 or 5 years ago for a friend. He decided he didn't want it anymore, so I bought it off him. I took out the original engine and box and put a 130 brake Passat TDI engine in it. Rad mounted up the front, wiring loom out of the Passat. The rad is in the front, in behind the original front grille. So it made a box inside, so the rad mounts in the box. The air comes in through the original grille and out through the floor. And it's a long-term project. If you're going to lower them, you want to tub the arches and narrow the front beam as well. Otherwise they just rub every time you hit a
So what do you
bump,
say you have to do? Raise the arches? Or
raise the arches, yeah. Tub the arches. And that one's tubbed like 2 inches.
on the inners?
Yeah, and then because the wheel sits, where the wheel is, it's right below the door, so you've got to actually narrow the front beam so it'll sit into the tub, you know. It's a Hazard tool chest. They were issued to all the Volkswagen garages in the 60s and 70s. It's a handy piece. You can get all your tools in there, fold it up, stick it in the car, bring it with you. A guy in the Volkswagen club lives in Holland, and he bought up a batch of them, about 15 or 20 of them, brought them over. It was 120 quid, I think I gave him for it. But it's great, yeah. There was one on Dundee for the guys looking 700 quid, 750 quid. I don't know if it's worth that. It's definitely a good buy at 120. Yeah, it's a cool piece. The pump I picked up in a farm up the road. They were clearing the place out, selling the farm, and there were 2 of them on the farm. They were used for pumping diesel for the tractors up until about 10 years ago. So I cut them out of the ground and hauled them back. Yeah, the original cast iron pumps inside, everything there. Yeah, about 6-7 years ago, I found the van from the commitments in a neighbour's garden, rotting away. So I dragged it out, bring it home, see if I could restore it, but it was absolutely knackered, too far gone. It's an Irish movie about a band in Dublin, and they used this pickup to get their piano and all their instruments around. I dragged it out, I had to use the Land Rover to pull it out of the ditches. There was trees growing up through it, so there was no chance of restoring it. The doors I had given a loan of to guys that were putting on a Volkswagen show about 2 years ago down in Limerick, and they haven't made it back yet. They've got the original sign writing, yeah. The whole front of the van looked as it did in the movie. A neighbour of mine was a builder, and he was using it after the movie, bought it off the movie set, I think, and he drove it for about 10 years as his work van, the same way it was in the movie. Who knows? Give it a go. Give it a go for 6 years and see.
Why 6?
That's what I lasted with the rentals. Yeah. I love making panels. Just love restoring old cars.
That's it. Another episode in the can. I'm having so much fun. Now the JPS Gilet thing, some of you got really close. Some of you got 2 of the 3 books. The 3rd book is the rarest of all, and I'll talk to you about it when we get a winner for this thing. But it was written by a guy, and this is a clue for you, who took Ayrton Senna rallying for the first time in the 1980s. Now, that's a really good clue. It's probably too good. I doubt this will go past the next episode, but we'll let it go as long as it takes. I really wanted this to be for the patrons because while I can't bring them a reward each, which is what I should be doing, and I will get to, I wanted to let them know that I'm thinking of them. So we'll let the patrons have a crack at this and see who comes up with what. On the subject of patrons, Douglas P. Gaither, Andy Nicholson, Jer Neeson, who upped his current pledge, Headers, Kenneth Nelson, Pablo Colunga, Mark Steiger and Randy Cox. Guys, not only are you making life easier now, at this point you're making life very exciting because I can start thinking about a set of wheels to get around in and obsess over. So who doesn't love car shopping? So thank you guys. I will try and bring you as much good content as I can. I hope you feel like you're getting something back. On that note, please like, please subscribe and please share, because the more credibility Soup gets, the more sway I have, the better content I can bring you. I can credibly approach people and get some really nice stuff to bring you. So the likes, the subscribes and the shares are just as important, and I thank you for anything that you've done so far, and please continue to do so. Okay, I am going back to search the classifieds for another dream car, and exciting that is too. So until I see you the next time, good luck. Come on, banger.